Before we begin Unit 1, I wanted to take a moment to address the themes that each of the texts that we are going to be reading over the course of the next few weeks really address and embody. And some of these texts embody more than one of these themes. So we're going to be covering a lot in this unit. It's about 1500 years roughly from the Anglo-Saxons to kind of the Renaissance period. So there's a lot of material written, and we are just going to kind of scrape the surface and do a brief overview of these texts. So below this little video is a more comprehensive list of all of the themes that we're going to be talking about individually and more in depth over the next few weeks. So it's kind of a place where you can use it as a reference and read over, or at least keep them in mind as we're reading through these texts, because it's going to be important when it comes time to writing your first essay. So, and it's also going to be important when working with your discussion board. So for the sake of this video, though, I just kind of wanted to do a little brief overview of the themes that you'll see in the upcoming weeks. So, yes, there you go. All right, so one of the, at least in Unit 1 and in Unit 2, one of the themes that we're going to see is the tension between paganism and Christianity, and how the Britons' conversion to Catholicism and to Christianity really kind of tie in together. And in some ways, there's this incredible tension between them, but in some ways, the text really kind of combine them beautifully in a way that kind of aids the conversion, so to speak. So pagan and Christian tensions, the legend of King Arthur. I'm sure you guys are all familiar with the legend of King Arthur, the Sword and the Stone. He plays an incredible and important role in medieval literature, not just in England, but also in France, but specifically English literature. He becomes this kind of unifying figurehead of British identity, which we'll talk about a little bit this week, but a lot when we get to Sir Gawain and the Green Knight and Sir Thomas Malory's La Morte d'Arthur. So the legend and the lasting influence of King Arthur, medieval sexuality and courtly love. This is a really interesting topic, so I can't wait to talk to you guys about courtly love. We'll see this in Sir Gawain and the Green Knight. We'll see it in La Morte d'Arthur, and we will see it in the Canterbury Tales and the various tales that we're going to be reading. Literature and the medieval church. A lot of the texts that we're going to be exploring this unit kind of show the changes and the development of the Catholic Church and the role of authority and power that it has, both socially, politically, religiously, spiritually speaking. And it's kind of interesting because we go from being this non-Christian nation to being one that's seeped in Christianity, and this development and this role, and particularly the corruption of the church, kind of leads us to where we're going in our next unit when we talk about the Reformation and things like that. So then there is the cult of the Virgin Mary, the cult of chivalry and effective piety. There are kind of two, there's this dichotomy of the presentation of women in medieval literature. On the one hand, you have the kind of Eve like figure, the cause of humanity's downfall, everything that's wrong with women. And this kind of goes into that anti-feminist um, portrayal of femininity. But we have the kind of Eve like figure, the one who's responsible for our sin and our corruption. And on the other side of that coin, we have everything that is good and pure and wonderful in the presentation of the Virgin Mary. So women kind of fall into one or two of those camps, and it also goes hand in hand with the cult of chivalry and this idea of courtly love, because Mary represents everything that every good Christian should be, and if every good woman and every good Christian should embody those ideals of the Virgin Mary, certainly every knight should embody those ideals as well. And that's going to be particularly noticeable when we talk about Sir Gawain and the Green Knight. Women, religious life, and anti-feminism. As I said, there are these two portrayals of femininity in medieval literature, and a lot of that goes ties hand in hand with the church and religious life, because men and the clergy were supposed to be celibate. So in order to discourage and kind of get women or men away, get men to denounce women, so to speak, in that whole idea of sexuality, there were an incredible amount of anti-feminist texts produced during the Middle Ages, and we'll see that in almost everything that we read in this unit. Particularly Sir Gawain and the Green Knight, the Canterbury Tales, and there are various tales, the Nun's Priest's Tale, and the Miller's Tale, and the Wife of Bath's Tale, and Le Morte d'Arthur. So there is that. And then finally, the social spectrum and social mobility. And that's particularly going to make sense when we talk about the Canterbury Tales. Most of the literature that we are going to be reading up until the 14th century really only depicts the aristocracy and courtly life and those types of things. But what about the other people who make up the crux of society? And we're going to kind of look at that rigid social structure and this idea of the social contract, and how people can, especially like in the beginning of the 14th century, there's this kind of uprising of trade and the middle class, and this idea of social mobility for men. And then, of course, there's that idea of mobility. How does a woman move up in society? Well, she does that through marriage. So we're going to see a variety all of the texts, like I said, that we're going to be discussing this unit embody one or more of these themes. So take a little kind of go over, you don't have to read it all word for word at this point, but it's there as a reference. I have a more comprehensive description of these themes below. And then keep the idea of this is to keep in mind these themes as we read through the literature of the unit. And then the genres that we will be studying, it's interesting because, and I want to say this because we are not reading novels, we are not reading stories. Most of the things that we are reading pre 18th century really are poems, and not in the sense that they're not like stories, and you'll see what I mean when we actually read them, but particularly for our first week, both of the things that we are going to be reading are examples of elegies and dream visions. And most everything that we're going to be reading, it has some sort of poetic form. So anyways, we're going to be reading elegies, dream visions, romances. That's not like those trashy Fabio romance novels that you see on the bookshelves of, the grocery store, or you used to see them. Oh, we'll talk more about that in next week. But the romance, both Arthurian and chivalric, satire. And then when we get to the Canterbury Tales, it's kind of this, we'll be reading an example of a fablio, it's a French word, an exemplum, and a fable. So we're going to take a tour of the literary canon, so to speak, in our first unit, and I am excited to get started, and I hope you are too. And without further ado, this is just the beginning of our first unit. So take a look at the explanation of the themes, keep them in mind as we move forward, and let me know if you have any questions.